Officers with the Barnstable Police Department responded to an emergency call on February 27 of 2011 about a possible shooting at a residence located in the 10 block of Fresh Holes Road in Hyannis. Hyannis is located on Massachusetts' Cape Cod Peninsula. Upon arriving at the scene, first responders located the body of 31-year-old Todd Lampley in a bedroom. He suffered what appeared to be several gunshot wounds. A handgun, believed to be used to commit the crime, was later found to have been tossed in a nearby pond. Unfortunately, finding the weapon did not lead investigators to the suspect, and the case went cold for some time. Investigators did find that the crime had lots of references to a show called The Wire. They found a phone at the crime scene, which was attached to the name Marlo Stanfield. Marlo Stanfield is the name of a fictional character in the show and who headed up the most ruthless and feared drug ring in Baltimore. Todd was inside of his home at night when he was shot by someone standing outside of his bedroom window. Another link to The Wire. In season 1 of the show, a fictitious woman who is cooperating with police is shot when the shooter stands outside of her window at night, taps the glass to get her attention, waits for her to approach the window, then fires a fatal shot into the home. Authorities also reported that they recovered a sweet potato from the scene of the fatal shooting. In season 4 of The Wire, one of the fictional police investigators solves a case in which the shooter used a potato as a makeshift silencer when fatally shooting his victim. Recently, with advances in DNA technology, the sweet potato was sent for DNA analysis. It was then discovered that DeVaris Hampton's DNA was on the sweet potato. In addition to the DNA evidence, Hampton was wearing a court-ordered GPS device that tracked his whereabouts at the time of Todd's slaying. The location data from that device placed Hampton at the Fresh Holes Road residence at the approximate time the crime was committed and later at the pond where the gun was recovered. Hampton and Todd also had a previous connection, with Hampton testifying in court that Todd was involved in the July 2007 slaying of Jacka Sellers in the same neighborhood. Sellers was also shot inside his home by someone shooting through a window from outside. This all led to 40-year-old DeVaris Hampton being arrested on February 24 of 2023 and charged with taking the life of Todd Lampley. Hampton appeared in Barnstable District Court, where he entered a plea of not guilty. He is scheduled to appear in court again on April 5 of 2023. In August of 1980, 2 field workers in Solano County, California found the body of a woman in a field in unincorporated Dixon around 20 miles southwest of Sacramento. The unknown woman suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head and neck. For more than 10 years, she remained unidentified, listed in county records as only Jane Doe. In 1992, the victim was identified, thanks to the National Missing Persons Unit, as 21-year-old Holly Ann Campiglia from New Jersey. Holly Ann began running away from home when she was an 18-year-old freshman at Glassboro State College in New Jersey. Holly Ann's mother claimed that issues had began the year before while she was a senior in high school. That's when she began taking drugs and having emotional problems. "We don't know if one triggered another," said Mrs. Campiglia. When Holly Ann ran away the first time, she was found a month later walking on Route 70, about a mile away from the family home on Forest Hill Road off Springdale Road. She would go on to run away for more times. Each time she came back, she was less responsive to the medical treatment that she took for emotional problems, said Mrs. Campiglia. Her mother says the last time she saw her daughter was when she jumped from the car while going to a counseling center on June 10, 1980. She said she wanted to get on with her life. "I want to see the world and do things my way." I tried to pull her back, but the car was on Route 70 near the Sheraton Post and I couldn't hold on to her. Her mother informed the Cherry Hill Police Department. "We didn't hear from her for a month until we got a letter. It said she was living with 2 guys. We should try not to think of her anymore. We tried to trace the letter, but the return address wasn't a real street." The letter was mailed from Sacramento in July of 1980. All further leads went cold. Even though the sheriff's office identified her in 1992, they had no idea who was responsible for taking Holly Ann's life. In 2021, Holly Ann's family asked the Solano County Sheriff's Office to review the case and resubmit any original evidence for DNA analysis. That's exactly what investigators did. A few months later, Their office received a report from the Serological Research Institute stating that male DNA was found on pieces of evidence that was collected back in 1980. Officials submitted that DNA to another database with the San Mateo Crime Lab in California and discovered that it belonged to someone already doing time for a serious crime. That man is Herman Lee Hobbs, who looks like something you'd find in a pyramid. Investigators found that 76-year-old Hobbs was serving a significant prison sentence for taking someone's life in 1975, for which he was convicted in 2005 in Sacramento. He assaulted and fatally stabbed 13-year-old Terry Pata in 1975. Terry vanished on the way home from her school in Rio Linda, which is a Sacramento suburb. Her body was found several days later, stuffed in a drain pipe. Hobbs also had been charged with taking the life of 29-year-old Brenda Ann Tucker, who went missing in 1994 from her home in Oroville. Loggers found her skull with a bullet hole in it in 2001 in Yuba County and DNA identified her. Hobbs, who knew her family, was charged with her slaying in 2001, but a judge dismissed the case the next year for lack of evidence. In February of 2023, an arrest warrant was issued by a Solano County Superior Court judge, along with a removal order to have Hobbs transferred from state prison to Solano County Jail to face the new charges for what he did to Holly Ann. Officials think Hobbs may have committed other crimes and had this to say in their Facebook announcement. Detectives continue to work in collaboration with other Northern California agencies to potentially identify and/or solve additional cases that may be linked to Hobbs. We are grateful to the Campiglia family for their patience and assistance, and to the labs whose new technology allowed additional testing of older evidence, and to the staff who worked tirelessly to help bring closure to a lifetime of waiting, the sheriff's office said. Anyone with information about the homicide is asked to contact the Solano Sheriff Investigations at 707-784-7050. The sheriff's office also wanted to give a special mention to the original deputy who investigated Holly Ann's case, Jose or Joe Cisneros. His life was taken in the line of duty in 1985. His hard work is still helping solve cases over 40 years later. In October of 2004, 28-year-old Keisha Brown's body was found in a bathtub inside her apartment in the 700 block of East Flamingo Road. An autopsy revealed that Keisha had been strangled, stabbed, and assaulted by an unknown attacker. Witnesses interviewed at the time provided a description of a possible suspect seen entering and leaving the apartment, but that person was never identified. Forensic evidence was collected at the crime scene, but was unable to help in identifying the suspect at the time. In July of 2022, Detective Dan Long reviewed Keisha's case. He requested for additional DNA testing of evidence located on Keisha's body during her autopsy. While working the case, Dan Long realized that there are a lot of similarities with crimes that took place in 2005. All of those crimes involved Norman Flowers. In 2011 had entered an Alford plea for charges against him that he took the lives of 45-year-old Mary Lee Coote and 24-year-old Reina Gonzalez. An Alford plea means Flowers didn't admit guilt but acknowledged prosecutors could prove their case against him. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to stipulate the 2 consecutive life prison terms without the possibility of parole instead of executing him. Mary Lee's body was found inside her Russell Road apartment on May 3rd of 2005. She had been assaulted and strangled. Flowers' DNA was discovered on her body. 8 hours later, Rena's body was found in the same complex. She had been strangled with a telephone cord. In October of 2008, was convicted and given a life sentence because he took the life of 18-year-old Sheila Quarles also in 2005. Flowers had previously spent time in prison, had been paroled twice and was out of prison for about 20 days when he took Sheila's life. With the crimes being so similar, Detective Dan Long was convinced that Norman Flowers was responsible for taking the life of Keisha Brown. It was only in February of 2023, however, when DNA linked Flowers to Keisha's crime scene and that it could be confirmed that he is responsible. Metropolitan Police Department Lieutenant Jason Johansson made the announcement to the public. As Johansson spoke during the press conference, members of Keisha's family stood behind him, wiping tears from their eyes. Keisha's daughter, Kalia Brown, briefly spoke through tears. "I just want to say thank you to the police department," she said. "Flowers remains at High Desert State Prison. where he is serving 3 life sentences. 30-year-old Deborah Lee Atrox lived in Salem, Oregon in 1988. She had an 8-month-old daughter with her husband, 34-year-old Robert Atrox. Robert was living in the couple's home in Sherwood, and Deborah lived in an apartment in Salem because by November of 1988, Deborah and Robert had been separated for 5 months. On November 29th of the same year, Robert went to pick up their daughter from a babysitter in Newberg, Oregon, while Deborah was at a hair appointment in Tigard. Deborah was expected to be home before 8 p.m., but she never showed up. Robert then called several friends and family members to see if they knew where Deborah was before reporting her missing to the Tigard Police Department. The next day, Robert told investigators he had still not heard from his wife. Deborah's car was then entered into the databases used by law enforcement as a vehicle connection to a missing person. Deborah's black Honda Accord was recovered by police officers in Beaverton, Oregon on December 1st of 1988. A city public works employee reported a suspicious abandoned car with keys in the driver's seat, located at the end of Southwest Murray Road. Witnesses said the car had been parked there since early on November 30th. The 2-door sedan also had its driver's side window down and was missing the license plates in the trunk of the car. Investigators discovered Deborah's body. She had been strangled based on the positioning of her body. It was determined that she had been placed there after her life was taken despite more than 3 decades of investigation. The case unfortunately went cold. Detectives with the Washington County District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit reopened the case in 2021, about a year after forming a partnership with the Washington County Sheriff's Office. The Cold Case Unit was formed in 2020 after receiving a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice. For the next year and a half, investigators re-interviewed multiple witnesses and had forensic evidence re-examined. All of this led to Robert Atrox being charged with taking Deborah's life on February 28th of 2023, where he was indicted by a grand jury. He was booked into the Washington County Jail. Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton had this to say: "I am proud of the work our cold case unit has done to ensure that victims and cases are not forgotten, despite the passage of time. Being able to use today's technology and apply it towards evidence that was seized over 30 years ago is a huge advantage in terms of challenges. We may think of these cases as old, or we may use the word cold, but if you talk to the family and friends of the victims of these cases, they're very current issues for them," Barton said. "They're still dealing with the trauma as a result of that crime." Barton also said that he can't give all the details that led to the arrest at this time, as it's still an ongoing investigation. On May 11th of 2007, 64-year-old Dennis Lee First's body was found at his apartment in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He had been stabbed and beaten. According to Tammy Mims, assistant manager for the Hawthorne Hills apartments where Dennis lived, said he had prostate cancer, didn't have many visitors, and lived on Social Security. Tammy said that when a friend called and asked her to check on Dennis, she notified Robert Gross, a maintenance employee at the apartments. Robert knocked several times on Dennis' door, and when no one answered, he entered the residence. Inside, he found Dennis lying face up on the bed, feet on the floor. Robert then saw all the blood and called 911. Evidence collected at the scene was sent to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation State Crime Lab in Ankeny for testing. Dennis's first wife, Christine Burmeister, said that he had a rough life. It's hard to believe somebody would stab him. He could hardly get around. Denise and Christine had 2 children. Their son Brad was born in 1963 and their daughter Laura in 1965. In the 1970s, the couple lived in Olin in Jones County, where Dennis worked as a purchasing agent at a Monticello steel company. He'd been living in Cedar Rapids since the couple's 1981 divorce. In 1990, Dennis had been arrested on charges of stealing from local businesses and for drunken driving. He'd also been accused of threatening a man from whom he rented a room. Things didn't get any better for Dennis after his son lost his life in 1993 in an auto accident. Dennis eventually lost touch with his daughter, ex-wife, and other relatives, but had begun calling them again a few years prior to his demise. In late May of 2007, Cedar Rapids police served 5 search warrants in the case, searching not only Dennis' apartment, but that of Curtis Pageant. Investigators took his fingerprints and a DNA sample with a swab from inside his cheek. They also took a pair of his boots from his apartment. Paget was the last known person to have seen 15-year-old Aaron K. Pospisil, who went missing from Cedar Rapids on June 3 of 2001. Paget, a friend of Aaron's older brother, told police that in 2001 he was leaving the Pospisil home at the same time as Aaron and agreed to give her a ride to her friend Britt's home. According to Paget, when they arrived at Britt's house, no one answered the door, and Paget claimed that as Aaron walked back to his truck, a black Chevrolet Cavalier with tinted rear windows pulled up to the curb. He said Aaron went up to the car and had a short conversation with someone, and then told him, "These guys will give me a ride," before getting into the Cavalier's back seat. Police could find no other witnesses to substantiate Paget's story about a black Cavalier in the neighborhood, and Aaron has not been seen since leaving her home with Paget. Finally, on March 1st of 2023, 42-year-old Curtis Randall Paget was arrested and charged with taking Dennis First's life. Lynn County Attorney Nick Maybanks said this case was a testament to the Cedar Rapids Police Department's commitment to victims and the community. This case shows that the department persists in seeking justice for victims and survivors, even in cases that may be hidden from the public eye. After the department's cold case unit approached Maybanks to review the case, and after several months of follow-up and a recent final consultation, Maybanks determined that Paget was responsible for taking Dennis' life. Police didn't say what exactly led to Paget's arrest, whether it was further DNA testing or something else. It was, however, later mentioned in the news conference that a partial blood boot print was found at Dennis' home that matches boots found at Paget's home. An oven mitt soiled with blood was also found. It contained both Dennis and Paget's DNA on the inside of the oven mitt. Paget's fingerprint was also found on a knife sharpener in Dennis' apartment in a drawer. There's been no updates on Aaron's case, just a reliable sighting in the spring of 2002. Aaron was spotted at a convenience store in Cedar Rapids. She was riding in the back seat of a car with Illinois license plates. This tip was provided to Cedar Rapids police. However, the car was not found. They have never been able to verify the sighting. The person who saw Aaron knows her well and is still convinced that it was her. Aaron is described as a Caucasian female, dark brown hair, dark brown eyes. Aaron has a small scar above her eye and had red highlights in her hair at the time of her disappearance. In December of 1992, the body of 31-year-old Lori Ann Pereira was found in the desert area of Las Vegas, Nevada. A Las Vegas resident who was out walking his dog just east of the Montgomery Ward's retail store, located at 2875 East Charleston Boulevard, made the discovery. Lori had apparent ligature marks on both ankles and both wrists, and it appeared tape had been placed over her mouth. The Clark County Medical Examiner ruled the cause as asphyxia due to manual strangulation with blunt force trauma to the head after a complete autopsy of her body. 13 months later, in January of 1994, the body of 35-year-old Pearl Wilson Ingram was found in the dumpster behind the Vons grocery store located at 4440 East Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas, Nevada by an employee of Silver State Disposal while on his normal trash collection route. Trash had been placed over Pearl's body in an effort to conceal her. After an autopsy was conducted, the Clark County Medical Examiner ruled that Pearl had been strangled. During the autopsy, it was noted several of Pearl's teeth were missing, and she had abrasions on the bridge of her nose and above her eye. For the next 3 decades, the cases of Lori and Pearl were reviewed by numerous Las Vegas Metro Police Department detectives in hopes of developing new evidence. In March of 2007, when detectives took a new look at Lori's case, they found male DNA on a swab that was taken from her body during the autopsy. They requested that further forensic DNA work be conducted. A DNA profile of the culprit was created and entered into CODIS, but no matches could be made. In July of 2012, detectives took a new look at Pearl's case. During this time, male DNA was found on a swab taken from her body as well. The DNA evidence was again entered into CODIS, and on that same date Las Vegas Metro Police Department officers were notified of a CODIS hit, linking DNA from an unknown contributor to both Lori and Pearl. This confirmed the same person committed both crimes. This was a huge breakthrough. connecting these two cases that otherwise would have not been connected. In June of 2022, investigators requested a genealogical investigation to be performed by Othram Incorporated. Based on research from Othram's in-house genetic genealogy team, a preliminary suspect was identified as Eddie George Snowden Jr. He was born in January of 1937. Checks conducted on Snowden revealed he had listed his address in the 2800 block of East Charleston, Las Vegas. Lori and Pereira's body was recovered at the 2700 block of East Charleston Boulevard in December of 1992 and 1.9 miles away from where Pearl Ingram's body was recovered in January of 1994. Additionally, Snowden's criminal history revealed he was living in the Las Vegas area at the time of both crimes. It also appears from Snowden's criminal history that he lived from 1956 to 1979 in the Fresno, California area, as well as several surrounding cities to include Sacramento, Santa Cruz, Madera, Merced, Woodland, and Watsonville areas. Las Vegas Metro Police Department cold case investigators were able to obtain familial reference DNA from one of Snowden's biological family members to confirm he was indeed the person who assaulted, beat, and strangled both Lori and Pereira and Pearl Wilson Ingram. Unfortunately, no arrests will be made in these two cases due to the fact Eddie George Snowden passed away in Las Vegas, Nevada in February of 2017. At the age of 80, the Las Vegas Police Department released a statement where they said that they wish to thank the Fresno, California Police Department, Othram, and the Vegas Justice League for their continued support in their endeavor to find justice to all victims as well as some form of resolution to their families, friends, and our community. As Snowden was born in 1937, he would have been 52 years old when he took Lori's life. It is unlikely that he started committing crimes in his 50s, so investigators are working to see if he is responsible for any others. A news conference was held on February 6th of 2023 to announce the identification of Snowden. Pearl's younger sister, Teresa Board, said that the word of her sister's assailant being identified by authorities brought much-needed closure to her family. On June 4th of 2006, hikers discovered a decomposing body a few miles from Lyons in the South St. Vrain Canyon in Colorado. Deputies and detectives discovered that the female body appeared to have been pulled from a shallow grave by a predator. Deputies located a pair of yellow ski pants, a sleeping bag, a pillow, and a pillowcase all neatly folded near the grave. Because of the condition of the woman's body, investigators were unable to identify her by her fingerprints. The sheriff's office said that the only object detectives found with the woman's body was a cross ring. The coroner's office was not able to determine the cause due to the condition of her body. Foul play was suspected because her body had been buried. Her body had evidence of animal predation but lacked any gunshot wounds, broken bones, or stab wounds. The coroner noted that he could not rule out strangulation. About 50 pounds of a white powdery substance containing calcium oxide, also known as quicklime, was located on the body, as well as in and around the grave site to a depth of approximately 14 inches. The sheriff's office asked the public for tips to try to identify the victim. Numerous tips were followed up on, including information of missing women from around the country. Jason Olkers, with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, recalled how sad it was because of the huge number of missing women in the metro area and country and what the family members were going through. The Sheriff's Office followed up on hundreds of names while using resources from the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, and other places to try to identify the victim. In October of 2006, the Sheriff's Office received a tip from a friend of the victim who reported her missing. A woman reached out to the Longmont Police Department to report that she hadn't seen her friend in a long time. She identified her friend as Angie Wilds. With this information, investigators were able to identify a person named Angela Wilds who had ties to the Longmont area. The friend provided a physical description of Angela, which matched the body found in the canyon. The woman also described a ring her friend was known to wear that seemed similar to the ring found with the remains. In November of 2006, DNA analysis by the Sheriff's Office comparing rib bones from the body with 4 of Angela's sisters confirmed the victim was 38-year-old Angela Wilds from the Longmont, Colorado area. Angela was last seen in April of 2006, 2 months before her body was found and 6 months before she was identified. Angela did not have a home or steady employment and essentially lived with friends while frequently sleeping on couches. Investigators interviewed family, friends, and acquaintances of Angela, but were unable to find out what happened to her. It was determined that DNA found on the ski pants belonged to Angela Wilds. There was also DNA from an unknown male contributor on the pants, the sleeping bag, and the pillowcase. On January 22nd of 2009, investigators received information from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation linking John Anger to the crime scene through DNA. Armed with both names, investigators were able to look into any connections between Angela and Anger. They found that several people had reported seeing them together in late 2005 and early 2006. A buccal swab from Anger was compared to the items recovered from the scene, and his DNA was determined to be the major contributor profile on the pillowcase and in the sleeping bag. On August 26th of 2009, Anger was interviewed by a detective with the Anchorage Police Department in Alaska. Anger reported that in February or March of 2006, he had attended a dive school in Texas and then gone to Colorado. There, he lived in Canyon City, Longmont, and Monte Vista until July of 2006. He said he moved to Alaska that August. During the interview, Unger claimed he did not know anybody by the name of Angie or Angela. When shown her photo, he said he did not recognize her. He was again interviewed that September by the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, where he again denied knowing a person named Angie or Angela. He also vehemently denied camping in the South St. Vrain area around the time of the crime. According to members of his family, Anger frequently visited a cave in South St. Vrain area and hiked and camped around it. The cave was off Highway 7, about 3 or 4 miles from Lyons, according to his parents. His sister recalled dropping him off in the area where Angela's body would be later found. Investigators drafted an arrest warrant for Anger, which was authorized by a judge, and then in 2010 he was arrested and charged with taking Angela Wilds' life. The Fort Collins, Coloradoan reported on March 5th of 2010 that Anger was serving time in an Alaskan prison for a probation violation charge when authorities issued the warrant for his arrest. His preliminary hearing was held on July 12th of 2010. However, after this hearing, a judge determined that probable cause did not support the charge and the case was dismissed. It was decided that there was not enough evidence to move forward with a prosecution. Public Defender Seth Timmons said at the hearing that they need to produce evidence first that John Anger is the person who took her life. They haven't done that, Judge. They can't even place him at the scene where her body was found, nor can they say how or where she lost her life. The following summer, the Colorado Supreme Court decided not to review the judge's decision. After the preliminary hearing, several people who knew Anger described him as volatile, and one witness reported seeing him try to strangle one of his ex-girlfriends. For the past few years, the Boulder County Sheriff's Office and District Attorney's Office, with the help from Colorado Bureau of Investigation and Federal Bureau of Investigation, continued to work on this case, interviewing new witnesses and consulting with forensic pathologists. This included previous girlfriends who said Angra tried to strangle them and was frightening and jealous and possessive. One witness said that certain women's names, including Angela, would send Angra into a rage. In 2015, a pathologist reviewed Angela's case. He determined that someone took her life, but was still unable to say the exact cause. The pathologist said he took the investigative findings into account, including that Angela was found naked, in a secluded wooded area, and covered with lime. Ultimately, he said, an asphyxia event was most likely. At the time of this determination, the pathologist was not aware of the previously alleged incidents of strangulation against John Anger. One of Anger's exes, who was no longer in contact with him, had plenty to tell investigators. Previously, in 2009, she said that Anger never strangled her. This time, in 2023, she told investigators that Anger had strangled her repeatedly during the relationship. She reported that Anger had once destroyed her tent because she did not want to live in the woods with him. He became more volatile and frightening when he was drinking or using drugs, she said. Two other potential witnesses told police in December of 2022 that they saw Anger and Angela together in the Bar El Motel in Longmont, Colorado, which is about 10 miles from the crime scene in the South St. Vrain Canyon along Highway 7. Police searched the motel's records and found the two stayed there between December 26th of 2005 and January 4th of 2006. As a result of recent years' work, authorities took this significant and new evidence and presented its findings to a grand jury. On February 16, 2023, that grand jury returned an indictment. The indictment was sealed until Angara was taken into custody in Alaska. On March 9 of 2023, 53-year-old John Michael Anger was arrested in Anchorage, Alaska in connection with what happened to Angela Josephine Wilds. His bond was set at $1 million. Boulder County Sheriff Curtis Johnson said, "We know Angela's family has been waiting a long time for this day to come. Her family is in our thoughts as we take the next steps in this important judicial process." Investigators are currently looking into the possibility that John Anger might be responsible for other crimes in Colorado and Alaska. If you have any information about this case, about Angela, or about John Anger, please contact Boulder County Sheriff's Office Detective Mike McKinley at 303-441-4692. Angela's sister Tammy Benson said, "I hope this time the courts, the judge, and everybody listens and that he gets what's coming to him." Tammy described her sister as loving and kind, and the prosecutors answered her prayers when they charged Angra for the second time. On April 28th of 1997, the city of Thousand Oaks, California was considered one of the safest places to live in the country by the FBI. It was a utopia in America until 10:20 a.m. That's when Thousand Oaks and Los Angeles County were never the same. On that Monday at Western Financial Bank, there was a manager and 3 tellers. There was no security guard, no locking the front door. There was no plexiglass to protect or separate employees. The tellers were sitting ducks when 2 armed men walked in. They had nylon stockings over their faces and they were disguised as construction workers. They had reflective vests on to draw attention away from their faces. The robbers got all the employees into the back room. In front of the safe, bank teller Monica Leach was ordered to open it. It would be the last thing she ever did. She led them to the vault, gave them the money, and did everything they demanded. And for unknown reasons, one of the 2 men held a gun to the back of her head and shot her. Monica was the only one who was shot. She succumbed to her injuries on the vault room floor. To the robbers, her life was worth a few $1,000s. They got away with $9 grand. Shortly after this brutal crime, local banks and donors raised $160,000 in reward money for whoever turned in the suspects. There was surveillance video. The images weren't great, but they were still usable. Witness descriptions also helped produce composite sketches. Police even got the getaway car and yet no arrests. The case sadly went cold. Monica's husband, Floyd Leach, spoke publicly in 2021 about the crime. He was 43 years old back in 1997. Floyd said that Thousand Oaks was a place where people left their doors unlocked. It is where he lived for most of his life and where he met his second wife, Monica. That morning, she left for work and we gave each other a kiss and said, "See you later." She walked out of the door to go to her job and I walked out of the door to go to my job, he said. "I think about it a lot. Every time I talk to one of her kids, it comes back. Her kids now have kids. I'm still close with all of her family," Floyd Leach said. Monica and Floyd met in church. Their love blossomed beautifully and naturally. It was the first time Floyd felt happy in months. 6 months prior, my first wife had passed of a medical condition. So we started hanging around together and then started dating. 7 months after we started dating, we got married. When Monica and I decided to get married, my oldest son said, "You're not going to replace my mom." And she said, "I'm not trying to." And then shortly after that, they got very, very close. My second son was always close with her. Monica was very instrumental in helping my boys out as well as her own family. We didn't have any his and hers. I loved her kids, she loved my kids, and it worked out very, very well. Monica worked in banking for 20 years. After she got married to Floyd, to become closer to home, she transferred to Western Financial Bank. This is what Floyd said about the crime. It wasn't a video game that you can just reset and make it all back the way it was. She was a real person. She was very loving and loved her family and her kids. I believe that if people do bad things, they need to pay for what they do. Getting those guys would just close a chapter in my life. Not the memories, but as far as closing the chapter of wondering where these guys are and what they're doing today, Floyd said. Investigators for many years were convinced the two men were members of the Crips gang. To get a better understanding of why investigators believe this, Dr. Georgia Leap was interviewed to explain. She is a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, and has been working with gangs for 40 years. The Crips are really one of the oldest gangs in the Southwest Angeles area. Their roots are very much here. Ironically, they have spread all over the world. I've met Crips gang members from Australia. I think it's significant to add that while their reputation lies in the fact that they've been involved in gang activity and criminal behavior, they've also been involved in some significant social services. To understand the Crips is to understand a very lengthy, very complex picture of street organization that began in the Southern California area. Leap said, "What happened in South Los Angeles is the factories that were nearby on Alameda Street began to close down and job opportunities and income narrowed significantly. When those factories closed in the 1970s, thousands of people lost their jobs and the area never recovered." Leap said, "The same decade, California voters approved Prop 13. That was a big win for homeowners. It capped property tax increases, but it meant a huge cut to programs that those taxes paid for, like school programs, law enforcement, and social services. Many joined gangs to make some money. In the late 80s to the early 90s, in order to make money, the Crips largely sold drugs. The gang generally made enough money to get by. What radically changed the game, according to Crips member Perry Dideau, was the movie Point Break. He says what the movie did is give a blueprint to some kids on how to rob a bank. And just like that, seemingly overnight, Southern California became the bank robbery capital of the country." Captain Eric Bouchard, with the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, explained, "There are banks on virtually every corner throughout Southern California. A lot of them are located in convenient places where it's easy to get off the freeway and stop in and take care of a transaction, especially going back before ATMs. Banks invested in security based on certain branches being frequent targets of robberies. The ones that were either less frequently robbed or virtually never robbed, that might have been a little further outlying and not right next to a freeway corridor. There was less investment in security," said Bouchard. "During the 90s, Southern California became the Wild West. At its peak in 1992, the FBI estimates more than 2,600 banks were robbed. That's an average of 7 banks per day. And instead of fighting each other in South Los Angeles, gangs started venturing to places like Thousand Oaks. That was their preferred method of getting money, was going around doing these takeover robberies, you know? The FBI had numerous cases throughout Southern California that were part of an organized criminal street gang," said Bouchot. Captain Bouchot also talked more about Monica's case specifically in 2021. "We don't often see something go this long without the right pieces of information coming into our lab, especially at the time with that larger award. There were banks that came together and put up money to encourage people to come forward. The vehicle was later recovered. They repainted it. We have those pieces of evidence. We have those handcuffs. We have the evidence collected from inside the bank. We just need to get all those last couple of pieces to carry this cross to the goal line," said Bouchot. Also, in 2021, with advances in DNA technology, it seemed like the case will finally be solved. Christina Tatlane, who is a forensic scientist and local CODIS administrator for Ventura County Sheriff's Office Forensic Service Bureau, explained the process. Touch DNA is when somebody basically touches an item and deposits some of their cells onto it. These cells have considerably less DNA in them than body fluids like blood or saliva. So with technology advancing over the years, it's gotten a lot more sensitive to be able to detect smaller amounts of DNA. This has become very helpful in cases where the only evidence available is touch DNA. On March 14th of 2023, authorities announced that 55-year-old Kevin Ray James was arrested in connection with Monica's case. He was arrested 5 days earlier on March 9th in San Bernardino, California, and charged with taking Monica's life. James was transported and booked into Ventura County Jail. James apparently lived in the Los Angeles area at the time of the robbery and was described as a gang member during the news conference. Authorities stressed that they still have not identified the second suspect involved in the robbery. A $30,000 FBI reward for information on that person remains in place, as does a $100,000 reward from Crime Stoppers. Anyone with information about the case or the second suspect is asked to call the Sheriff's Office Major Crime Bureau at 805-383-8704 or email them at coldcaseatventura.org. Ventura County District Attorney Eric Nasarenko had this to say at the news conference. This was a senseless, unprovoked, and vicious crime. He added that Monica Leach grew up in the Somos community of Ventura County, was a proud graduate of Rio Mesa High School, and came from a banking family. She liked needlepoint and going for walks in the morning and was described as a beloved wife, daughter, and mother who helped raise 4 children. Dr. Rick Swartzberg is a chiropractor who had an office next to the bank where Monica worked and got to know her well in the 2 months that she worked there. He said, "Was definitely a normal day at first, at least I thought it was. In between patients, I'd often go over to my office, which overlooked the parking lot. And that's when I saw somebody just barrel right by my office super fast. It was unusual, so I took note. But I didn't hear anything, so I went and saw the next patient in the room. That's when I got the call immediately to come out because one of the tellers was there saying that Monica had been shot. Everybody was saying, is there anything you can do to help? I said, I can try. During the CPR part, obviously, maybe for a second it looked like things might be improving, but it was pretty rapidly apparent that it wasn't." Mary Agnes Maroney was born in Chicago, Illinois on May 9th of 1928, the first of 2 daughters to Michael and Catherine Maroney. The couple started their family just before the Great Depression hit. The family lived in poverty as Michael only made $15 per week passing out handbills. A relative of Catherine's wrote to a welfare agency and a paragraph on their plight was printed. The service did not normally disclose addresses, but through a slip, the family's address 5200 Wentworth Avenue was learned by a woman. On May 14th of 1930, Mary Agnes' mother answered a knock at her door and was greeted by a woman who claimed to have been sent by a social worker to deal with the Marones case. She was described as well-dressed, about 22 years of age, protruding teeth and a cultured voice. The woman identified herself as Julia Otis. After Catherine disclosed the family's many problems, the woman asked if she could temporarily take Mary Agnes to California with her, adding that she will be unrecognizable and fat as a butterball. Catherine refused. After promising to return, the woman handed Catherine $2 and left. The following day, the woman came back, this time with baby clothes, as Catherine was pregnant. The woman stated that she had arranged to get a better job for Catherine's husband Michael and offered to take Mary Agnes to a nearby store to buy her some clothes and shoes. Reluctantly, Catherine gave her consent. Later she commented that Mary Agnes sobbed and refused to go with the woman, but was taken anyway. Mary Agnes and the unidentified woman never returned. Mary Agnes' parents reached out to the police and began to search for their missing daughter. The Maroney family received a letter from Julia Otis the day after she took Mary Agnes. It read, "She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can do to get you on your feet. Don't worry about her or anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis." This was the last the Morones ever heard from the woman who claimed to be, quote-unquote, Julia Otis. Police scoured Chicago's railroad stations for any clue that Mary Agnes had been taken on a train. 2 weeks after the kidnapping, a woman who identified herself as Alice Henderson sent the Morones a letter in which she stated that Otis was her cousin and that she was love-hungry because her own husband had a baby and passed away over the year before. Henderson never wrote again, and authorities state that the letter from Otis was written in the same handwriting as the one written by Henderson. Unfortunately, investigators were not able to find Mary Agnes or the woman who took her. Throughout the years, there were various sightings but nothing that could be confirmed, and the case went cold. Stories about Mary Agnes would appear in the newspaper now and then, particularly when other children went missing. Her story eventually caught the attention of Chicago Daily News reporter Eden Wright, who noticed something about the Maroney family in a photo. All the members of the family resembled each other. The newspaper wrote. The Chicago Daily News convinced a California newspaper to print pictures of the Maroney family, hoping it would lead to Mary Agnes. The pictures were apparently spotted by a man who claimed one of Mary Agnes' sisters looked so much like his wife that it could have been her in the photograph. The woman is Mary McClelland, a 24-year-old housewife. In 1952, she came forward claiming that by looking at the photos of Mary Agnes' siblings, she suspected she was Mary, the missing girl. 6 more siblings were born after Mary Agnes disappeared. Mary McClelland had been adopted within a year of the kidnapping by Charles and Nora Beck. Dr. Krause, after studying and comparing her dental casts, named her as one of the family. Mary McClelland's skull and blood showed she was a Maroney. According to the doctor, and he said Catherine Maroney claimed to recognize her, which was not the case. On September 3rd of 1952, the Chicago Daily News ran the following words atop its front page: 22-year search for kidnapped baby ends. It claimed characteristics in McClelland's teeth helped identify her as Mary Agnes, and the newspaper arranged a meeting between McClelland and Catherine Maroney. Catherine said, "She's a great lady, fantastic person. I wish she was my daughter, but no." An aging physician named Dr. E.W. Marathu stated that he delivered Mary McClelland to an unknown mother on November 17th of 1927, and that her mother provided a baby picture of her daughter dating from 1928, which proved she had been adopted 2 years before the kidnapping. Furthermore, Mary Agnes underwent an operation for a ruptured navel, but Mary McClelland did not have the scar Mary Agnes had at the time of her disappearance. Further DNA testing proved she was not Mary Agnes. She passed away in 2005. A DNA test performed in 2008, following Mary McClelland's passing, conclusively determined that she was not Mary Agnes. In February of 2023, it was announced that DNA testing had determined a link between Mary Agnes' surviving family and relatives of Jeanette Breachard, a Florida resident who passed away in 2003 at the age of 75. Jeanette Breachard was raised as an only child, married twice, had 3 children, and spent more than 50 years as a nurse. Jeanette's family was told that she was born on April 14th of 1928, and that her biological father passed away 2 months after she was born, and that she spent the first 6 years of her life in Chicago. She was raised by Jeanette Solerick Darris Anderson and a stepfather, Frank Darris. The pair raised Jeanette as a devout Catholic. Jeanette married Edward Jennings. Decades later, she married again, that time to Earl Burchard. Both of her husbands have since passed away. Jeanette had 3 children, Terry Arnold, Barbara Joan Jennings, who passed away in 2006, and Edward Clifton Jennings Jr., who passed away in 2004. Jeanette's daughter, Terry Arnold of Florida, who is still alive, has suddenly found herself entangled in a historic Chicago cold case. Terry said she was contacted in September of 2022 by a Cook County detective who had questions about her late mother and asked if she would be willing to take a DNA test. First, Terry thought it could not be right. Then she decided to take the DNA test just to prove the detective wrong. The results came back on October 28th of 2022 and revealed all was not as it seemed. Though the maternal side of Jeanette Burchard's family was Polish, Terry said her DNA results revealed she is not. She is mainly Irish. The Morones are also Irish. Terry told the Chicago Sun-Times that she's since learned my family is completely different from what I was always led to believe. And she said she's very confident her mother was Mary Agnes. Terry said her mother loved her pets, opera, and the Miami Dolphins. Her life apparently began in Chicago, but most importantly, she was the world's greatest mom. We adored my mother. A granddaughter of Jeanette Burchard, Lori Hart, acknowledged the pain that Mary Agnes' disappearance must have caused the Morones. But she said that she's still blessed to have had Jeanette Burchard as her grandmother. Anytime I needed her, she was there, Lori Hart said. Mary Agnes' nephew, 55-year-old Don Maroney of downstate Flanagan, is also convinced his aunt has been found. Don, Terry, and Lori believe Jeanette Burchard was Mary Agnes because of the work of Cook County Sheriff's Office Detective Jose Rodriguez. He was assigned in June of 2022 to investigate Mary Agnes' disappearance as part of Sheriff Tom Dart's Missing Persons Project. Jose Rodriguez and Commander Jason Moran said commercial DNA testing revealed the genetic association between Terry Arnold and members of Don Maroney's family suggested they were all cousins. That left Terry trying to make sense of a new family history, but it also offered closure to the Maroney family, which has been at the center of the case for 93 years. Mary Agnes' mother, Catherine, was haunted by the loss of her daughter and fell into a deep depression. Catherine passed away in 1962 at the age of 49. She was only 17 years old when Mary Agnes was kidnapped. Mary Agnes's father Michael passed away in 1957 when he was 58. His final words were said to be, "They never found my baby girl." Don Maroney said the family had always hoped whatever happened to his aunt, that she led a good life and she was taken care of. And she was. Terry said that she had never before heard the name Julia Otis, and she doesn't know how her mother came to be raised by Terry's grandmother. "All I know is she ended up with her, and I just feel bad that the parents never knew what happened to their daughter." Either way, the Maroney family can honestly truly know that she was very much loved. Terry also said that if her mother was still alive to learn the news, she's sure that she would have reached out to the Morones. She would have gone to the family and said, "I am here. I am fine." Kathy and Small. On February 22, 1986, a woman's body was discovered on a remote road in South Pasadena, California. The scene was chilling, with the victim found wearing only a nightgown, having been both stabbed and strangled. Kathy and Small, a devoted mother, had her life cruelly taken. The pursuit of justice for her murder would span 3 decades, but a shocking revelation eventually emerged, linking her case to one of California's most notorious serial offenders. Born in 1967, Kathy and Small was known for her loving and caring nature, especially when it came to her family. By the time she turned 19, Kathy was already a mother of 2 young children, fully embracing the responsibilities of motherhood while also being a protective big sister and devoted daughter. On the morning of February 22, 1986, a woman's body was found on a road in South Pasadena. She was dressed only in a nightgown, and it was evident that she had endured a violent attack. Authorities observed that she had been both stabbed and strangled, with no identification found at the scene. Her lifeless body provided little information, and for days, the mystery of her identity remained unsolved. That is until a breakthrough came from a man in Lake Elsinore who had seen a newspaper story about the murder. He contacted authorities, believing the victim might be his roommate, Kathy and Small. This pivotal lead quickly redirected the focus of the investigation, and the man was able to positively identify Kathy as the woman found in South Pasadena. According to the man, Kathy had been living with him in Lake Elsinore for a few months and had been working as a prostitute in the area. His revelation painted a different picture of Kathy's recent life, one that was unknown to her family in France. He shared with the detectives that Kathy had left his house the night before her body was discovered, wearing the same nightgown in which she was found. It was a chilling detail that would later tie directly into the events leading up to her tragic end. The man further explained that Kathy had told him she was meeting someone named Bill that night. Kathy had mentioned that Bill had given her $50 to drive with him to Los Angeles, a detail that provided investigators with a potential lead on who might have been involved in her murder. With Kathy's identity confirmed and new information about her final hours emerging, detectives focused on uncovering the truth about what happened the night she met Bill. Over the years, detectives pursued several leads in Kathy's case, but none brought them closer to solving the crime. The breakthrough came 3 decades later when a sheriff's detective received a call from an investigator with the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner. The examiner had been at the scene of a natural death at a residence directly across the street from where Kathy's body had been discovered 33 years earlier. Inside the home, a 63-year-old man had been found lifeless on his living room couch. He lived alone and had no children, but the investigation into his home would prove crucial to Kathy's cold case. While examining the deceased man's home, the coroner's investigator made a disturbing discovery. Scattered among his belongings were numerous photographs of women who appeared to have been given illegal substances, assaulted, and possibly held against their will. These troubling images suggested a dark side to the man's life. Further raising suspicion was a newspaper article found in his bedroom, which reported the identification of Kathy Small as the victim found stabbed and strangled in South Pasadena in 1986. The eerie coincidence of the article and the photos prompted investigators to revisit Kathy's unsolved case. With this significant link, the detectives sought a search warrant for the home, hoping to uncover evidence that could connect the deceased man to Kathy's demise. Several items were recovered and sent for DNA testing, with the hope that modern forensic analysis could finally provide answers. The criminalists tested these items, searching for any trace of DNA that could tie the man to the crime scene or Kathy herself. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn. DNA tests revealed that the decedent's DNA did not match the DNA found on Kathy. Despite the disturbing items in his possession and the proximity of his home to the crime scene, the man was ultimately not linked to her slaying. His DNA did not correspond with any known criminal cases, leaving detectives with a setback. Yet, the investigation was far from over. With the case reopened, detectives decided to retrieve all the original evidence that had been held since 1986. The materials were transported to the Sheriff's Crime Lab in Los Angeles for comprehensive DNA analysis, using advanced technology unavailable years before. This new analysis of the old evidence ultimately unlocked the mystery that had haunted Kathy's case for over 3 decades, providing long-awaited answers to the questions. On August 19, 2020, Slang detectives received a pivotal notification from a criminalist that significantly advanced the investigation. DNA tests conducted on the assault kit and the victim's clothing revealed the presence of DNA from 2 male donors. One of the individuals was identified as William Lester Suff, a convicted serial offender with a notorious reputation. Known as the Riverside prostitute perpetrator or the Lake Elsinore perpetrator, Suff had been responsible for a string of brutal slayings in Southern California. Suff's criminal history was extensive and horrifying. In January 1992, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop, which eventually led to his conviction for the end of 12 women in Riverside County between 1989 and 1991. His violent spree earned him an end-of-life sentence, and he had been on capital punishment for those cases. But Suff's criminal history stretched back even further. He had been convicted in 1974 for taking the life of his own 2-month-old daughter in Texas. For that crime, Suff was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but he was paroled in 1984 and moved to California, where his slaying spree resumed. After the DNA match in Kathy Small's case, detectives knew they were on the verge of a breakthrough. In May 2022, Suff was transported from San Quentin Prison to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Men's Central Jail for questioning. Over the course of 2 days, the detectives interviewed him about Kathy. During these interviews, Suff confessed to ending her life and provided disturbing details about her final moments. His confession also included admissions to some of his previous slayings in Riverside County, further solidifying his brutal legacy. William Muster Suff remains on Execution Row at San Quentin State Prison, where he is awaiting execution for his convictions. A press conference was held in August 2024. Lieutenant Thomas read a statement from Kathy's younger sister, Deanna Larson, who lives out of state. Deanna was 10 at the time her sister lost her life, but said that she sensed her sister was trying to get her life on track. She said in her statement, before she could take another step forward, her life was ended. The man who ended my sister also destroyed me, my family, and the family of others. I don't know why Kathy decided to go with Bill that night. I have spent nearly my entire life trying to understand who took the life of my sweet sister. I think of her every day. Moving on to the next case. Helen Terry. On August 28, 1980, a young mother was brutally murdered in her Sacramento, California apartment. The crime scene, marked by 13 stab wounds and a terrified 1-year-old crawling through the aftermath, became one of the city's most enduring unsolved cases for over 4 decades. Investigators faced numerous challenges in identifying Helen Terry's killer until, decades later, an arrest was finally made. Helen, 27 years old, lived in the Orangewood West Apartments on Wyndham Drive in Sacramento. Known for her deep devotion to her family, Helen was a loving and hardworking mother, determined to provide the best life possible for her 1-year-old son. At the center of Helen's life at the time was an ongoing paternity suit against Robert Terry, who was believed to be the biological father of her son. Helen was seeking child support from Robert in the hope of securing financial stability for her child's future. On August 28, 1980, a neighbor witnessed a disturbing scene unfold outside Helen's apartment. The neighbor saw a man aggressively pounding on her door, followed by chaotic sounds from inside the apartment. Shuffling noises and blood-curdling screams echoed through the walls. The commotion outside painted a terrifying picture of the violence unfolding behind closed doors. Fearing for her own safety, the neighbor hesitated to intervene and could not call the police, as she didn't have a phone. Shortly afterward, another resident in the complex complained of water leaking into their unit. When the apartment manager entered Helen's apartment to investigate the leak, he discovered a horrifying scene. Helen had been brutally stabbed 13 times and was left to die on the bathroom floor. The water that had caused concern was from a running faucet, adding to the disarray of the crime scene. Her 1-year-old son was found alone in the apartment. Crawling through the aftermath of the vicious attack, the police were immediately called to the scene, and investigators quickly began piecing together what had transpired. Blood stains were scattered throughout the apartment and furniture was overturned, indicating a violent struggle had taken place. It was clear that Helen had fought desperately against her attacker before succumbing to her fatal injuries. Despite the clues left behind, including the chaotic state of the apartment and the extensive blood evidence, identifying a suspect would prove to be a challenging task. Sacramento police launched an intense investigation into Helen's slaying. They combed through the evidence, interviewed residents, and pursued every possible lead in hopes of catching the perpetrator. A $2,500 reward was offered to encourage anyone with information to come forward. However, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community's desire for justice, no suspect was identified. The case gradually grew cold as detectives found themselves unable to develop any tangible leads or witnesses to push the investigation forward. Years went by with no answers, and Helen's case remained one of Sacramento's many unsolved cases. However, in February 2016, hope was reignited when an investigator from the department's cold case unit decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. With advances in DNA technology, investigators were then able to re-examine the physical evidence collected from the crime scene in the hope of finding new leads. As the cold case team processed the old evidence, a major breakthrough occurred. DNA found at the crime scene of Helen pointed to a familiar name, Robert Terry, the man Helen had been embroiled in a paternity and child support dispute with at the time of her demise. This discovery immediately raised suspicions, as Robert had been a figure in Helen's life during a tumultuous period, but he had never been formally charged or named a suspect in the years following her slaying. Despite the promising DNA evidence linking Robert to the crime scene, detectives faced significant challenges. They needed more than just a DNA match to build a solid case against him. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position, knowing that while the DNA provided a potential lead, it was not enough to definitively place Robert at the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. There were still gaps in the timeline and insufficient corroborating evidence to bring charges against him. In 2024, new developments in Helen's case emerged when the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office Cold Case, Science and Technology Unit took on the decades-old investigation. Using advanced investigative methods, detectives uncovered enough new evidence to finally charge Robert Terry with the slaying of Helen Terry. On September 27, 2024, 81-year-old Robert, residing in Rancho Cordova, was arrested and booked into Sacramento County Jail. Authorities have not yet confirmed whether Robert was the biological father of Helen's 1-year-old son. Their contentious relationship, compounded by the unresolved paternity dispute, remained at the center of the investigation. The police continued to examine their interactions and what role the paternity issue may have played in the motive behind the slaying. Robert Terry is set to appear in court for a bail hearing on October 17th, where further details about the case may come to light. His arrest at this late stage in life brought a shocking conclusion to a cold case that had stumped detectives for over 4 decades. Helen's brother, John Mays, said, "She was very kind, very loving. That's why we can't even imagine something like that happening to her. It was totally uncalled for. We've been wondering since day one, and this is the first bit of hope we've had since then. And we're going to take it as far as we can. We had suspicions, but there wasn't much we could do with just suspicions. When it finally came down to us, it was like a huge relief. Like something we had known all along but could never prove. Moving on to the next case. Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a resident noticed cats playing with an object and went to investigate. The object turned out to be a human skull, discovered at the Orange County apartment community. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office responded and conducted a search of the area. Additional skeletal remains, along with clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber firearm was also recovered near the remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40-60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The sheriff's office submitted forensic evidence to Athram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. DNA was extracted from the remains, and in January 2024, Athram identified the individual as Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was around 40 years old at the time of his death. Larry grew up in the Winter Park area with his siblings and graduated from Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office encourages anyone with information that could assist in solving Larry Rozier's case to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. Moving on to the next case. Catherine Namath. In October 2002, Catherine Namath visited her parents' cabin on Noon Lake, Wisconsin, on a rainy night. The cabin was empty as her parents had left earlier that day for their winter home in Florida. Namath had stopped by to grab some food from the freezer. A few minutes after arriving, she called for help on her radio. She used her radio identification number saying, "This is 96. There's a man with a raincoat, and he's scruffy looking," and then the radio went dead. Her husband tried to contact her by radio without success. He then decided to go to the cabin with their son. When they arrived at the cabin, they found Namath lying on the floor. She was still breathing and was semi-conscious. They asked her if she knew the attacker, but she said she didn't know. She died while being airlifted to the hospital. Officials said that nothing was stolen and that it didn't appear to be a random attack. Evidence from the cabin showed that she was chased through the property trying to fight off her attacker but received multiple stab wounds. Police have DNA evidence but have been unable to match it to anyone. Some speculated that the killing might be linked to an embezzlement investigation involving her husband and 3 others from the Elko Fire Department Board. The investigation was eventually resolved when the former treasurer admitted to embezzling at least $3,500 and was dismissed. Despite this, there have been no suspects or new leads, and Catherine's murder remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Gary Lee Haney. On January 3, 1979, a duck hunter stumbled upon human remains belonging to a male, tangled in fishing line on the tide flats near Spencer Island, just south of Marysville, Washington. The Snohomish County Coroner's Office labeled the victim John Doe 791, as he was the first John Doe found that year. Despite efforts from coroner Robert Phillips, the cause of death remained unclear. By March 1979, the man had still not been identified, and the Cassidy Funeral Home laid him to rest at Cypress Lawn Cemetery in Everett, Washington. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office later revisited the location where the remains were discovered, but found no additional evidence. Over the years, the case went cold. In February 2008, Detective Jim Scharf from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team, alongside retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Kausert, began to re-examine the unidentified persons case. With advancements in DNA technology, they hoped to exhume the remains to collect DNA samples that had not been taken during the initial investigation. However, the process of reviewing the case, obtaining exhumation permits, and conducting DNA testing would take several years. In July 2015, the remains of the John Doe were exhumed from Cypress Lawn Cemetery, with officials from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office present. The remains were then transported to the Medical Examiner's Office for further examination and given the name Spencer Island Doe. Additionally, forensic odontologist Dr. Kyle Tanaka took dental radiographs and uploaded them to NCIC and NAMUS, hoping to find a match with a missing person. NCIC, the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, is a computerized system that tracks crimes and missing persons, allowing law enforcement agencies nationwide to compare cases. However, no dental matches were found in the NCIC database. In February, forensic artist Natalie Murray took measurements and photographs and drew a facial reconstruction of what the John Doe may have looked like in life. In February, Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist at the King County Medical Examiner's Office, performed an examination of the remains and estimated that they belonged to an adult male with Caucasian ancestry between 50 to 56 in height and between 27 to 61 years old. In September of 2018, a section of the right femur was sent to the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center for DNA extraction and was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System. From 2018 to 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner investigators ruled out numerous missing persons by circumstances, testing, and dental records. In 2021, the Medical Examiner's Office began collaborating with Othram Incorporated to obtain an advanced DNA profile suitable for investigative genetic genealogy. In January of 2021, a section of the femur bone from Spencer Island John Doe was sent to Othram. The funding for the laboratory work in this case was generously provided through DNAsolves.com. In May of 2021, Othram successfully obtained a DNA extract that was sufficient for testing after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. Biogeographical analysis of the DNA profile revealed that the John Doe was in fact Caucasian. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office uploaded the Othram DNA profile to genealogical databases that allow law enforcement to search and obtain several matches. Adam Wilcoxon built ancestry trees from several of the top matches and found a male who went missing in the Everett, Washington area in the late 1970s named Gary Lee Haney. DNA reference testing of Gary's half-sister ultimately confirmed that Spencer Island Doe was Gary Lee Haney, who was about 29 years old when he went missing. The identification was made in March of 2023. Gary was apparently not reported missing, or at least investigators found no record of that. He was born in Topeka, Kansas, and traveled the world with his mother and adoptive father, who was in the Air Force. Gary loved the Beatles and to play the piano. His parents both passed away when he was young, and he got estranged from the rest of his relatives, so the only photos of him are as a child. The circumstances of his disappearance are not known. Gary's cousin, Hal Thane from Texas, was able to provide a lot of information. He said, "It is a relief and closure to know about Gary." He also said that Gary Lee Haney was born Gary Joseph Condamiti on September 23, 1950. His mother, Bernice Schaefer, and his biological father divorced when he was very young. Around 1955, his mother remarried to Sheldon Lee Haney, who adopted him and renamed him Gary Lee Haney, legally changing even his middle name to match his stepfather. Hal Thane, now 71, saw his cousin Gary in person maybe twice in his life when they were both kids. His uncle Sheldon served in the Air Force, so the family lived in places all across the country from Kansas to New York City. His clearest memories of his cousin are captured in a few precious black and white pictures. Young Gary cradling a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Young Gary holding a bigger dog's leash beside his mother in a pale dress, and his stepfather in a white dress shirt and slacks. Young Gary with his front teeth peeking out from a half smile on what looks like a school picture day. Hal Thane said Gary had some sort of a mental disorder. Given what he knows, he wonders if Gary lived with autism. He'd heard another family member describe him as schizophrenic in adulthood. Gary's biological father, Joseph Condamiti, passed away at a Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was about 16. His mother passed away when he was 19. His adoptive father completed his military service and worked at Boeing until his retirement. The family lived in the Everett area from the early 1970s until at least 1990. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the Snohomish Police Department at 360-568-0888. Betsy Ertzmer. Betsy Ruth Ertzmer, born on July 11, 1926, in Holland, Michigan, was just 22 years old when her life was tragically cut short. The youngest of 4 children, Betsy initially studied English and art at the University of Michigan before transferring to Pennsylvania State University after graduation. Her long-term boyfriend, David Wright, was a medical school student at the same university. Reflecting on the loss of his girlfriend years later, David often wondered what might have happened if Betsy had stayed with him that weekend when she was murdered. David had planned to marry Betsy. On November 28, 1969, she was in the library working on a research paper when fellow students found her collapsed on the floor. Bystanders assumed she had suffered a seizure or fainted and began performing CPR. The campus hospital was alerted, and by 5:19 p.m., an ambulance took Betsy to the Rittenor Health Center, where she was pronounced dead shortly after. It wasn't until doctors examined her body that they discovered she had been stabbed once through the left breast. Betsy was wearing a red dress that concealed her blood, and she had bled into her lungs, leaving little blood around the wound. Investigators later concluded that she had probably been stabbed from behind, as there were no defensive injuries on her hands or arms. They theorized that Betsy was likely familiar with her killer and did not fear him. Reportedly, just minutes after the stabbing, 1 or 2 men left the library and told the clerk, "Somebody better help that girl." One witness claimed there was only one blind man. It's unknown whether it was 1 or 2 men, and in either case he or they remain unidentified. On the back of the murder, police began their investigation and held 5,000 interviews in the course of it. They made no arrests and pinned down few suspects. Nobody seemed to have a bad word to say about Betsy, and she was described as smart and good-natured and had no known enemies. Whilst David Wright, her boyfriend, was considered a person of interest initially, he was quickly ruled out when their good relationship was vouched for by those who knew the couple. And according to friends, he didn't leave the study group he was in on the day of the murder, providing him with a rock-solid alibi. Witnesses were few and far between in Betsy's case. Some reported hearing a scream, while others told of the sound of falling books or shelves, likely from when the student collapsed among the stacks in the library. Consequently, 3 drawings were released of witnesses that police couldn't track down. But unfortunately, these illustrations were highly generic, and it appears that the witnesses were never found. The murder weapon was also never recovered, leaving investigators with little to go on. To make matters worse, the murder scene had actually been cleaned up by a janitor after Betsy was taken to hospital, leaving police with even less to work with as any crime scene clues were now gone. Despite the lack of leads or information, police did eventually find several suspects. An early suspect in the case was a man named Robert Dirge, a 27-year-old English professor who died in a car crash in Michigan about 3 weeks after the murder. He was investigated and cleared, although it's unknown what drew him into the eye of the police as a person of interest in the first place. It was also briefly speculated that the infamous Ted Bundy was responsible for the killing, as he'd attended Temple University in Pennsylvania in 1969 and was a frequent visitor of university libraries. However, he was also ruled out. Another fleeting suspect was some kind of military man given the precision of the wound. It was later theorized that perhaps Betsy had stumbled upon a gay couple or encounter and was killed so that she wouldn't tell of anything she'd witnessed. This was thought because when a black light was used on the area where she was found, it revealed human bodily fluids. But the stacks were notorious for couples doing drugs and having sex, so it couldn't really be determined that Betsy had seen anything. The biggest suspect in the case was a man named Richard Hefner, sometimes referred to as Rick. Just hours after the murder, before the news broke, Hefner went to the home of his Penn State professor and asked if they had heard the news about Betsy. It seems that Richard had dated the 22-year-old woman for a brief time, and Hefner told police that their relationship came to an end in October of 1969. Despite the fact that at the time, Betsy had been dating David Wright, and they'd been discussing marriage. Hefner told authorities that he didn't know of the murder until the day after it had occurred, contradicting the account that he'd gone to his professor's home to tell of the news of her death. Despite the suspicious circumstances around Hefner, he was never investigated any further. Worryingly, those who knew him referred to him as a sociopath. He reportedly once drove 800 miles to proclaim his love to a woman he barely knew on her doorstep. He also once punctured a neighbor's tire with a knife and threw dog waste through another neighbor's car window. 6 years later, in 1975, Hefner was arrested for molesting a 13-year-old boy, but the trial resulted in a hung jury. After this, he had frequent run-ins with the law. In 1992, he was accused of inappropriate behavior with a child. And in 1998, he was charged with assaulting a woman in a parking lot, which resulted in the victim receiving a dislocated jaw and loosening several teeth. It's widely believed by online spectators and crime authors that Hefner was responsible for the murder of his one-time girlfriend. Although it's unknown why he seems switched from harming women to young boys, an odd leap to say the least. According to Hefner's nephew, he once heard his mother shout, "You killed that girl and now you're killing me." Betsy's nephew is convinced that Hefner was responsible for her murder. Hefner passed away in February 2002, and to this day, it remains uncertain whether he was truly behind the crime. Betsy's family never saw justice for her death, and her former boyfriend, David Wright, continues to wonder about what could have been. 50 years later, Betsy's case remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Brian Ninsfield. In January 1997, Brian Dylan Ninsfield was an 18-year-old freshman at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He was in his second semester and known for being reserved with a small circle of friends. Having experienced his parents' divorce during childhood, Brian and his parents mutually decided on Roger Williams University because of its welcoming, home-like environment. Brian often felt homesick while pursuing his architecture course. In his free time, he enjoyed reading and listening to music by the water near Mount Hope Bridge. However, he was known to feel overwhelmed by the academic demands and struggled to keep up with his studies. On January 31st, Brian's life began to take a troubling turn when he received a disturbing phone call from a former Roger Williams University student. The caller threatened him, claiming he could still access the campus. Following the call, at around 12:30 a.m., Brian contacted his father, asking him to come to the university. Brian's father advised him to contact campus security, but their only suggestion was to change his phone number. A week later, on February 6th, after finishing his literature class, Brian disappeared and was never seen again. His parents were not informed about his disappearance until February 12th. When they arrived at his dorm room, it appeared untouched, but his mother, Marianne, noticed sand in his bed, which alarmed her since Brian was known for being very clean and organized. Not long after his disappearance, Marianne received a call from a woman claiming to be connected to the university. The caller alleged that a school administrator and 2 faculty members were withholding critical information about Brian and his case. However, the line then went dead. Nothing further has come of this lead, and the woman on the other end of the phone has never been 6 months later in September. Labor Day weekend, a mother and daughter walking along the Hog Island beach located a few miles from Brian's school stumbled across the ghastly discovery of a shoe on the shore, which contained part of a foot inside. DNA showed that the limb belonged to Brian, as did a shin bone that was found nearby. No other remains have ever been found, and the student was presumed dead upon the discovery. Eventually, the man who'd made the threatening phone calls to Brian was identified. He was a former student named Josh Cohen, and was pointed out by campus officials. While Josh and Brian were friends during Brian's first semester, it has been suggested that the two were possibly romantically involved, although no one can say for certain. It's alleged that the relationship ended just weeks before Brian's disappearance. While Cohen admitted to making the phone calls, he claimed they were all in jest. Authorities do not believe that Josh Cohen is involved with Brian's disappearance. There are several theories regarding the case of Brian Ninsfield. Police speculate he accidentally fell into the river beneath Mount Hope Bridge, or that perhaps he jumped from the bridge itself. His parents believe their son fell victim to foul play, and that Cohen, who had made the distressing phone calls, was responsible. Another theory put forward by online investigators is that perhaps Cohen was going to come forward about their relationship, and Brian committed suicide as a result, as he was unhappy or uncomfortable with the decision. Brian's parents largely blamed Roger Williams University for failing to notify them when their son vanished. As the first 24 hours are so precious in a missing persons case, they felt they'd have had a better chance of finding Brian alive had they been alerted sooner. His father, Stephen, said, "I remember just this uncaring, unsympathetic, unconcerned by the university." Stephen and Marion later went on to sue the school, although it's uncertain if they won their case or not. They also pushed for a national law requiring faster parental notification when a student goes missing. Roger Williams University exhibited questionable behavior regarding Brian Ninsfield's disappearance. Reportedly, someone in the admissions office instructed university tour guides to tell anyone asking about Brian that he was safe at home with his parents. Additionally, there were allegations that individuals at the university were subtly discouraged from providing information, though the exact methods remain unclear. Staff members were also reportedly directed not to answer any student inquiries about the case. Minimal action seems to have been taken concerning Brian's disappearance, which was largely brushed aside by both the university and local law enforcement. The reasons behind this lack of attention remain unclear, but without proper action from officials, Brian's case may remain unsolved indefinitely. Moving on to the next case. Carlina Renee White. Carlina Renee White was born on July 15, 1987, at Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. When she was 19 old, her parents, Joy White and Carl Tyson, took her back to the hospital after she developed a high fever. A woman, dressed as a nurse, assisted the parents upon their arrival. Unbeknownst to them, this woman was not actually a hospital employee. In the early hours of the morning, she took Carlina from the hospital, kidnapping her. At the time, the hospital's video surveillance system was not functioning, leaving Carlina's parents as the only ones able to describe the woman who took their daughter. This marked the first baby abduction from a New York hospital. Despite widespread distribution of flyers featuring Carlina's image across the country, efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful. In response, her parents filed a $100 million lawsuit against the hospital, ultimately securing a $750,000 settlement. The woman that took Carlina is Anujita and Pedwi. She raised Carlina as Nedra and Nednance in Connecticut. Carlina first suspected that and might not be a real mother when and could not provide a birth certificate. In February 2005, when Carlina fell pregnant and asked again, and provided her with a false certificate. The officials noticed it was forged, however. Carlina then confronted Anne, and confessed then as she was not Carlina's real mother. She lied, however, by telling Carlina as she was abandoned by a drug addict. This caused her to not immediately go look for her real parents. When she was 23 years old, she had started looking on websites for missing people such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There she found a picture of the kidnapped Carlina and noticed that it's similar to the baby pictures she have of herself as Nedra and those of her daughter Simone. She used the hotline to finally get into contact with her birth family. DNA would prove in 2011 that she is indeed the missing Carlina White. And Pedway is currently serving a 12-year prison sentence in a federal correctional institution in Aliceville, Alabama for the abduction. Carlina now goes by the name Nitty since it is a name she gave herself. She does have a relationship with her biological parents, and they are making up for lost time. Moving on to the next case. Daisy Evelyn Shelton. What if a long unsolved mystery from the past were to unfold, uncovering dark secrets and concealed truths? How would a community cope with the revelation of a brutal crime after decades of uncertainty? And what occurs when a confession finally offers new hope in solving a cold case? In June 1964, a fisherman discovered a dismembered human arm in a gravel pit east of Tip City, located along State Route 571 in Ohio. This horrifying find led to a thorough search to uncover the remainder of the remains. Attempts to drain the gravel pit were unsuccessful, leaving investigators frustrated and in search of new clues. For days later, another fisherman uncovered a disturbing find: a burlap bag in a section of the old Miami-Erie Canal. Inside the bag was a dismembered human torso. The mystery deepened as a head and a leg were later discovered in the same canal, gradually revealing more of the grim puzzle. The remains were identified as 43-year-old Daisy Evelyn Shelton, a mother from Dayton, Ohio. Daisy resided on Springfield Street and was employed at Delco, an automotive electronics company. According to a missing persons report filed by her daughter, Rita, Daisy was last seen in late August 1963. She had told her daughter that she would return home soon, but never did. Known for her generous nature, Daisy was always there to support those around her and was beloved by her family for her helpfulness. Her life had been cut short, and the circumstances of her demise sent shock waves through the community. Despite the initial fervor of the investigation, leads quickly dried up and the case grew cold. Decades passed without resolution until 2017, when an unexpected break in the case emerged. In a twist that could only be described as fate, a man fearing he was near his end in a hospital bed made a startling confession to a nurse. He claimed to have witnessed the slaying of Daisy Shelton. Fearing his own impending death, the man felt compelled to confess, disclosing long-hidden truths. Miraculously, he survived, and detectives seized the opportunity to interview him. The witness, whose identity was kept confidential for his safety, shared a chilling account of the events leading to Daisy's murder. His vivid recollection of the crime provided crucial details that had eluded investigators back in 1964, offering new insights into a case that had remained unresolved for decades. The witness recounted that he saw an individual take her life by striking her on the head with a hammer at a home on Springfield Street in Dayton. The brutality of the act left a mark on the witness, who described the scene in grim detail. After the initial blow, Daisy Shelton was dismembered in the home by two more men. Her body parts were then discarded in various bodies of water in and around Tip City. Effectively, scattering the evidence made the investigation more challenging for the authorities at the time. The suspect, who was the only one linked to the hammer, cooperated with detectives and agreed to several interviews. Initially, he firmly denied knowing Daisy Shelton, even though they lived on the same street and worked for the same company. However, during an interview in August 2017, his facade began to unravel. Hesitantly, he confessed to knowing Daisy, marking a crucial turning point in the investigation. As the interviews progressed, detectives meticulously pieced together the suspect's movements and interactions with Daisy. They discovered inconsistencies in his statements and unexplained gaps in his alibi for the time of Daisy's slaying. The pressure mounted as forensic evidence combined with the witness's detailed account painted an increasingly damning picture of the suspect's involvement. Detectives explored the possibility of personal vendettas, financial disputes, and other motives that could have led to her brutal slaying. To build a comprehensive case, detectives turned to modern forensic techniques. They re-examined the burlap bag and other physical evidence, hoping to find DNA traces or fingerprints that could irrefutably link the suspect to the crime. Advances in forensic science allowed them to analyze the evidence with a precision that was unimaginable in 1964. The community's response to the reopened case was mixed. For some, the resurfacing of such a horrific crime brought back painful memories, while for others, it reignited a long-dormant hope for justice. Media coverage of the case intensified, with many in Dayton and Tip City following the developments closely. The suspect himself brought up the topic of a box voluntarily, suggesting he could explain why his DNA might be found on it. He claimed it was all a setup, orchestrated by the eyewitness to implicate him. Despite his attempt to deflect suspicion, he admitted that the box had indeed been in his home on Springfield Street. The suspect conceded that a box from his house had been used to carry Daisy's body parts. This admission was a critical breakthrough. The suspect further admitted that it was possible Daisy had lost her life in his home. This was a significant shift from his previous answers, aligning more closely with the witness's account. These admissions combined with the forensic evidence strengthened the case against him. The suspect confessed that he looked guilty and could possibly be convicted in court. He admitted that the mounting evidence, his connection to the box, the location sling, and his relationship with Daisy painted a damning picture. Despite his claims of being framed, his own statements had inadvertently solidified his status as the prime suspect in Daisy's case. They continue to build their case, piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Daisy's demise. They scrutinize the suspect's background, seeking any history of violent behavior or other potential motives. In light of the new evidence and the suspect's partial confessions, the case against him grew stronger. The prosecution prepared to present a comprehensive narrative that would encompass the witness testimony, forensic findings, and the suspect's own incriminating statements. The goal was to provide a clear and convincing argument that would lead to a conviction and finally bring justice to Daisy Shelton. The witness testified at a grand jury hearing but lost his life before the suspect could be prosecuted. The suspect, who was not named, passed away in September 2022 at the age of 92. Despite his demise, the grand jury hearing provided crucial insights into the case. They revealed the depth of the investigation and the compelling evidence gathered against him. The suspect's testimony and the findings were meticulously documented, ensuring that Daisy Shelton's story would not fade into obscurity. Law enforcement officials and legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony, and the legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony and the accumulated evidence. They strived to piece together a comprehensive account of the crime. The courage of the eyewitness, who broke his silence after so many years, was instrumental in reigniting the case. His detailed confession, alongside the suspect's reluctant admissions, solidified the narrative of Daisy Shelton's tragic end. Although the suspect's demise precluded a formal trial, the investigation's transparency brought some solace to the community. Public statements from detectives affirm that every effort had been made to uncover the truth and bring justice to light. Finally, after 60 years, on March 29, 2024, the Miami County Sheriff's Office announced that prosecutor Anthony Kendall determined Daisy Shelton's case was solved. They decided this due to the suspect, who has now passed away, as well as other evidence. Daisy's granddaughter, Maria Walling, said that her father, Rodney, also passed away before learning what happened to his mom. Maria said they never found the slayer when they found all the body parts, and it really messed him up. She knows the names of the men involved in her grandmother's slaying, but deputies will not release them. I'm like, finally, they found the perpetrators. There were 3. I can't help but feel for the families who will soon learn the truth about how my grandmother's life was taken. While Daisy's family now knows who was responsible for her death, the police have yet to determine a clear motive. Though Daisy Shelton's case may never reach a courtroom verdict, the tireless search for justice, fueled by modern forensic advancements and the courage of a key witness, has ensured that her story is no longer forgotten by time. Moving on to the next case. Benjamin Kyle. On August 31, 2004, at 5 a.m., a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia, made an alarming discovery. Behind the restaurant, he found a man who was unconscious, sunburned, and completely naked. The man seemed to have been there for some time, as his body was covered in numerous ant bites. The employee immediately contacted emergency services, and the man was transported to Candler Hospital in Savannah for medical care. Without any identification on him, the man was initially recorded as Burger King Doe in the hospital records. It took 2 weeks for him to regain consciousness. Once awake, he stated that he believed his name was Benjamin, and he chose the last name Kyle, explaining that his initials could match the name of the place where he was found. Afterward, Benjamin was transferred to Memorial Health University Medical Center for further care. They noticed that he had cataracts in both his eyes. A charity was kind enough to pay for his operation to get it removed. Finally, 9 months after he was found, he could see himself in a mirror. Benjamin was surprised to see that he was 20 years older than he believed he was. The next few years spent time in shelters and care centers. In February 2007, he was diagnosed with dissociative amnesia. Benjamin also spent some time being homeless. It was hard finding a job since he couldn't remember his social security number. There were some people that tried to help him remember things from his past so that he could find his family. They looked through missing person databases, but he wasn't in there. What did help, though, was he started to remember certain things. He remembered that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. The part of his social security number he could later remember was consistent with numbers assigned in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. In 2015, with advances in DNA technology, his sample was taken so it could be entered into a database. Parabon Nanolabs, led by C.C. Moore, led the way in the search for his real identity. Initial results that came back showed that his last name is most likely Powell, and that he is a descendant of a 19th-century man named Abraham Lovely Powell. On September 16, 2015, he announced that his real identity has been found. He now knew his real name and close family members. In 2016, he said that his real name is William Burgess Powell. He was born on August 29, 1948 in Lafayette, Indiana. So, remembered correctly that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. In 1976, he cut ties with his family and moved to Boulder, Colorado. It's still not really known what happened to him, as it led to him being found. Moving on to the next case. Andrew Gostin. In February 2007, Andrew lived with his parents and sister in Doncaster. On the morning of September 14th, he prepared for school, but he waited in a nearby park until his parents had left for work. Afterward, he returned home, changed out of his uniform, placed it in the washing machine, and took his PSP, leaving the charger behind. There was 100 in his room, but Andrew did not take this money. Instead, he withdrew £200 from his bank account, went to Doncaster railway station, and bought a one-way ticket to London before boarding the 9:35 a.m. train to King's Cross. Witnesses saw him getting on the train alone. The ticket seller at Doncaster recalled Andrew because he declined a return ticket, despite it costing only £0.50 more. Eyewitnesses on the train later reported seeing Andrew, describing him as quiet, and noted that he played with his PSP throughout the journey. He would be captured on CCTV at approximately 11:20 a.m. CCTV imagery of Gosden at King's Cross was not checked until 27 days after his disappearance, by which time the trail had gone cold. CCTV images showed Andrew leaving King's Cross station on the day that he vanished. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. 1 year after Andrew's disappearance, an unidentified man spoke into the intercom at the doorway to Leominster Police Station, claiming to have information about the case. When an officer arrived to answer the door, however, the man had disappeared. There were fears that Andrew may have been groomed by someone that he met online. This was investigated, but searches of his sister's laptop, which he occasionally used, and the school computer found nothing. His parents held the belief that he did not have any social media or email accounts that they were aware of. He also did not own a mobile phone. There was speculation that Andrew may have traveled to the capital to end his own life. His family doubted this but did not rule it out. They paid a company to search the Thames using sonar equipment. A body was found, but it was not Andrew. A further theory was that Andrew ran away in search of a new life. It was reported that his favorite TV show featured a character that left his old life and changed his identity. His parents have continued to put money in his bank account just in case he needs it. However, it has remained untouched since the day he left. After more than 10 years, there is still no trace of Andrew Gostin or any explanation for his mysterious train trip. Keenan Day Bennett. In criminal cases, proving that a crime has taken place can be challenging when there is no body. Without this key evidence, the defense can argue that there is sufficient room for doubt, suggesting that the victim may have disappeared voluntarily. Historically, securing a conviction in murder cases without a body has been difficult. However, with advancements in forensic technology, we are now witnessing more cases where justice is achieved despite the absence of a body. On September 29, 2002, Vartasha McCullough informed Kmart staff that her 4-year-old daughter, Cananda Bennett, was missing. According to McCullough, they had visited the Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina around 5 p.m. when the girl disappeared. Initially, McCullough claimed that Cananda vanished from an aisle in the store. However, she later revised her statement, saying she had entered the Kmart thinking her daughter was behind her. only to turn around and find her missing. McCullough and her daughter were from Conway, South Carolina, and had been visiting Cananda's uncle in Whiteville at the time. Although the Kmart staff called emergency CCTV cameras in the store, there was no footage showing the 4 of CCTV cameras in the store. There was no footage showing the 4-year-old. Investigators also found no evidence that Cananda had even entered the state. Aside from her parents, McCullough and Eddie Bennett Jr., who went by Kevin, no one had seen her in the 2 days leading up to her disappearance. Authorities searched the couple's car, but there was no child seat in it, and no other signs that a young child had been present except a single Matchbox toy car, which they found wedged under a seat. As law enforcement officers became more doubtful about the McCullough story, they were approached by further witnesses from the couple's hometown who claimed that they had seen Cananda with bruises on her shoulder and face just days before she vanished. When asked about them, the 4-year-old said, "My mommy did it." While one witness did confront Cananda's mother, McCullough told them, "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Further fueling this idea, a second witness seeing cuts on the child's body and marks that looked as if they'd been caused by a strap. And Canine's grandparents had become so concerned for her welfare that on September 29th, the very day she went missing, they told the police in Conway that they suspected the 4-year-old was being abused. They had not seen Cananda in a week, and before contacting police, they went to confront their daughter with their suspicions. But while they heard someone moving around inside her apartment, nobody answered the door. Investigators noted that both of Cananda's parents seemed uninterested in her case and never asked for any updates beyond the first week of the investigation. Additionally, McCullough failed a polygraph test regarding her daughter's disappearance, while Cananda's father, Kevin Bennett, refused to take one, although both had samples of their blood and saliva taken. According to the authorities, both were uncooperative and both had inconsistencies in their stories. When McCullough was told that she had failed her polygraph, she reportedly cried. An officer said to her, "We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" Here, Cananda's mother reportedly nodded. However, when she was asked to take them to where the body was, she told them she couldn't. After regaining her composure, McCullough retracted her previous admission and maintained that she had lost her daughter while at the Kmart store. When the police searched the family's home in Conway, things got worse. Investigators noted that the home had been sanitized with bleach, the smells still lingering in the air. 3 bottles of the substance, a damp mop, and several towels lay in plain sight. McCullough claimed that she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by housing authorities, but officers believed she was attempting to clean up a crime scene. Searches of the home turned up transfer stains, which are stains left behind when fluid splatters are wiped, which matched Cananda's DNA. Authorities said that the scene would suggest that a physical assault had taken place. Furthermore, Cananda's toys and clothing had been thrown out, as if her parents didn't believe she'd be coming home. And both McCullough and Bennett used past tense when talking about their missing daughter. In February, Hennon's parents were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. Investigators claimed that the DNA evidence found in the apartment proved that the 4-year-old had died in Conway and had never even set foot in South Carolina. This, combined with the numerous witness statements about Cananda's abuse, led to the couple being charged. Around the same time, however, the parents accused the police of racism as they felt they did not conduct enough searches for their daughter. 2 years later, in February, Bennett's charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. McCullough, however, was charged with more crimes, including unlawful neglects of a child and inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Throughout her trial, McCullough maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that Cananda's death was unintentional and that her mother had panicked and attempted to conceal the crime. However, the mother of one's defense said that McCullough had always maintained that she was not guilty and that the state has no evidence to the contrary. Despite this, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. McCullough was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Reportedly, she burst into tears and clutched a Bible upon hearing this verdict, and her family appeared to be visibly upset by the news. McCullough's father, the one who'd reported his granddaughter's abuse to the police, believes his daughter is innocent. In the years since, McCullough has never told investigators what happened or where Kynane's body is. Kynane's was described as a bright and well-mannered young girl who could read simple words and count to 30. She was a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Investigators suspect that her father was involved in her disappearance, and they have stated that they will pursue charges if new evidence emerges. Natasha McCullough is scheduled for release from prison in 2023. Cananda's case marked the first time in South Carolina history that a trial for a child's murder was held without the discovery of a body. Moving on to the next case. Lillian Marie Cardenas. In February 1967, unidentified remains were found at the bottom of a cliff north of Jenner, Sonoma County, California. The remains belonged to a woman who was between 52 and 54 inches tall. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse that buttoned down the back, along with light-colored pants. It was determined that she had likely died the previous year. Her manner of demise was ruled as slaying. She had multiple skull and rib fractures. Despite investigators' attempts, the woman could not be identified. She became known as Sonoma County Jane Doe. A forensic composite was developed. The case was made public in hopes of generating new leads about the woman's identity, but no matches were found. She was buried at the Sonoma County Cemetery. The details of the case were later added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. In February 2009, her body was exhumed with the help of Dr. Mark Griffin, an anthropology professor from San Francisco State University. The examination determined that Jane Doe was a white female between 40 and 46 years old. In 2022, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Arthram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist with the identification of the woman. Arthram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Arthram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile in a forensic genetic genealogy search to produce new investigative leads, which were returned to investigators. A follow-up investigation was conducted by law enforcement with the new leads. This led to relatives of the unidentified woman. Nearly 60 years after the remains were discovered in Sonoma County, the remains have been identified as Lillian Marie Cardenas, who was born in 1928. Lillian's last known residence was in San Francisco. She had been estranged from her family prior to her demise. The investigation into her demise is ongoing. Investigators ask for anyone with information on Lillian Marie Cardenas to dial 707-565-2727 or email officials at sheriff-coldcase@sonoma-county.org. Moving on to the next case. Xavier Rollins. On June 17, 2014, a young man tragically lost his life outside the River Crossing apartment complex in Texarkana, Texas. Xavier Rollins, a 25-year-old Army veteran, was the beloved son of Charlotte Rollins. Charlotte, despite facing numerous challenges, never gave up in her relentless pursuit of justice for her son. Years later, a breakthrough in the case would finally provide answers to what had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery. Xavier, who shared a close and loving bond with his mother, spent much of his time with her, and their relationship was built on love and mutual support. Everything changed on June 17, 2014, when Xavier was fatally shot outside the River Crossing apartment complex on College Drive. At just 25 years old, he had been out of the Army for 4 years and was working hard to build a future for himself. Although an investigation into his death was launched, no significant leads came forward, and the case remained unsolved, leaving Charlotte to cope with her profound loss. Despite the case going cold, her resolve to seek justice never faltered. On the 8th anniversary of Xavier's death, June 17, 2022, Charlotte organized a balloon release in an effort to renew attention on the case and encourage anyone with information to come forward. This poignant event was not just a tribute to Xavier, but also a call to the community to remember the impact of violence and to support families like hers who are left searching for answers. She expressed the following, encapsulating the longing for closure that she and countless other families endure. If someone came forward, I would know my prayers have been answered. Charlotte brought a banner adorned with photographs of local crime victims, highlighting the ongoing struggle for justice faced by many. She stated, "We have some of them that yes, the case has been solved, but we have a whole lot of them that have not been solved." In 2024, a significant breakthrough occurred in the long unsolved case of Xavier Rollins, renewing hope for his family and friends. The police never ceased their efforts to find justice for Xavier, and Detective Thomas Shaddix had been diligently working on the cold case for several months. His commitment to uncovering the truth led him to discover DNA evidence, testing options that had not been available a decade earlier. Recognizing the potential of this technology, he decided to pursue it, in hopes of finally finding answers for the Rollins family. As Detective Shaddix delved deeper into the investigation, he sought the expertise of the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, which provided invaluable assistance. Their collaboration was made possible through a federal grant program from the Department of Justice, allowing them access to numerous resources, including expedited forensic testing. These advanced forensic methods enabled law enforcement to identify 27-year-old Cameron Cheatham as a suspect in the 2014 slaying of Xavier. Following the identification of Cheatham, the Attorney General's office played a critical role in facilitating his arrest. Using the newly uncovered evidence, Detective Shaddix secured a warrant for Cheatham, charging him with capital slaying. Cheatham was not difficult to locate, as he was already in custody at the bi-state jail, serving time for a felony probation violation warrant stemming from his arrest in September. This fortunate turn of events allowed the police to expedite the legal process and ensure that justice was being sought for Xavier. On October 1, 2024, Charlotte received the life-changing call she had been longing for. She will never forget the moment when Detective Shaddix informed her of the arrest. Charlotte recalled, her voice filled with emotion, and he said, "We made an arrest, and I just went to screaming and hollering and yelling. I mean, you would have thought that I had just had a baby for the first time. That is what that felt like. It is like, okay, I'm about to get justice for my baby," she shared. "I have got 30 to 40 shirts with his picture on them. Everywhere I went, he was going to see his face." After the arrest, Cheatham was booked on a capital murder charge, with his bond set at a substantial $1 million. The upcoming trial brought a renewed sense of purpose and closure, reigniting the hope that had gradually diminished over the years. Brian Ninsfield. In January 1997, Brian Dylan Ninsfield was an 18-year-old freshman at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He was in his second semester and known for being reserved with a small circle of friends. Having experienced his parents' divorce during childhood, Brian and his parents mutually decided on Roger Williams University because of its welcoming, home-like environment. Brian often felt homesick while pursuing his architecture course. In his free time, he enjoyed reading and listening to music by the water near Mount Hope Bridge. However, he was known to feel overwhelmed by the academic demands and struggled to keep up with his studies. On January 31st, Brian's life began to take a troubling turn when he received a disturbing phone call from a former Roger Williams University student. The caller threatened him, claiming he could still access the campus. Following the call, at around 12:30 a.m., Brian contacted his father, asking him to come to the university. Brian's father advised him to contact campus security, but their only suggestion was to change his phone number. A week later, on February 6th, after finishing his literature class, Brian disappeared and was never seen again. His parents were not informed about his disappearance until February 12th. When they arrived at his dorm room, it appeared untouched, but his mother, Marianne, noticed sand in his bed, which alarmed her since Brian was known for being very clean and organized. Not long after his disappearance, Marianne received a call from a woman claiming to be connected to the university. The caller alleged that a school administrator and 2 faculty members were withholding critical information about Brian and his case. However, the line then went dead. Nothing further has come of this lead, and the woman on the other end of the phone has never been 6 months later in September. Labor Day weekend, a mother and daughter walking along the Hog Island beach located a few miles from Brian's school stumbled across the ghastly discovery of a shoe on the shore, which contained part of a foot inside. DNA showed that the limb belonged to Brian, as did a shin bone that was found nearby. No other remains have ever been found, and the student was presumed dead upon the discovery. Eventually, the man who'd made the threatening phone calls to Brian was identified. He was a former student named Josh Cohen, and was pointed out by campus officials. While Josh and Brian were friends during Brian's first semester, it has been suggested that the two were possibly romantically involved, although no one can say for certain. It's alleged that the relationship ended just weeks before Brian's disappearance. While Cohen admitted to making the phone calls, he claimed they were all in jest. Authorities do not believe that Josh Cohen is involved with Brian's disappearance. There are several theories regarding the case of Brian Ninsfield. Police speculate he accidentally fell into the river beneath Mount Hope Bridge, or that perhaps he jumped from the bridge itself. His parents believe their son fell victim to foul play, and that Cohen, who had made the distressing phone calls, was responsible. Another theory put forward by online investigators is that perhaps Cohen was going to come forward about their relationship, and Brian committed suicide as a result, as he was unhappy or uncomfortable with the decision. Brian's parents largely blamed Roger Williams University for failing to notify them when their son vanished. As the first 24 hours are so precious in a missing persons case, they felt they'd have had a better chance of finding Brian alive had they been alerted sooner. His father, Stephen, said, "I remember just this uncaring, unsympathetic, unconcerned by the university." Stephen and Marion later went on to sue the school, although it's uncertain if they won their case or not. They also pushed for a national law requiring faster parental notification when a student goes missing. Roger Williams University exhibited questionable behavior regarding Brian Ninsfield's disappearance. Reportedly, someone in the admissions office instructed university tour guides to tell anyone asking about Brian that he was safe at home with his parents. Additionally, there were allegations that individuals at the university were subtly discouraged from providing information, though the exact methods remain unclear. Staff members were also reportedly directed not to answer any student inquiries about the case. Minimal action seems to have been taken concerning Brian's disappearance, which was largely brushed aside by both the university and local law enforcement. The reasons behind this lack of attention remain unclear, but without proper action from officials, Brian's case may remain unsolved indefinitely. Moving on to the next case.